You know the smell. The moment the automatic doors slid open and the cold air hit you, that specific combination of new plastic, cardboard packaging, and something faintly chemical, like the inside of a brand new toy box. Your eyes took a second to adjust, because everything was bright and loud and endless. Shelves stretching 12 feet high in every direction. Aisles that seemed to go on further than they had any right to. Somewhere near the back, the bikes. Somewhere up front, the video games in their locked glass cases. And overhead, that yellow and red sign with its backwards R, the letter that every child understood to mean, this place was made for us. At its peak, Toys R Us operated 1,691 stores of its own, plus another 257 licensed locations, spread across 38 countries and jurisdictions. It employed approximately 65,000 people in the United States alone. In 1990, the company held a 25.4% share of the entire American toy market. 1 in every 4 toys sold in this country passed through those aisles. In the 1980s and into the early 1990s, no toy company in the world, not a manufacturer, not a distributor, not a retailer, had more power over what toys got made, what prices those toys sold for, and which products became the year's must-have. The firm's founder was once described in The Atlantic as the person most responsible for loosening Santa's grip on the toy business. That is not a small thing. They survived the bankruptcy of their parent company in 1974, when Charles Lazarus himself oversaw the restructuring that kept the doors open. They survived the arrival of Walmart in the toy aisle. They survived 2 recessions. They survived the failure of their own internet strategy and a decade of management upheaval. They survived 5 CEOs in 10 years. They launched Babies R Us, Kids R Us, and the Imaginarium concept stores. And the biggest standalone toy store in the world, a 110,000 square foot flagship at the corner of Broadway and 44th Street in Times Square, with a Ferris wheel turning slowly inside it. And then, on September 18, 2017, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Less than a year later, on June 29, 2018, the last American stores closed their doors. 33,000 workers lost their jobs. How does the world's largest toy retailer, a company earning nearly $14 billion in revenue as recently as 2011, end up liquidating in darkness, with its workers holding petitions on courthouse steps? And what actually happened inside those stores, inside those boardrooms, and inside those financial structures that made a recovery impossible? That story is not the one you have been told. It is more deliberate than that. And it starts not on Wall Street, but on an ordinary street in Washington, D.C. in the spring of 1948. Chapter 1. The Bicycle Shop Boy. Charles Philip Lazarus was born on October 4, 1923. The son of a Jewish family in Washington, D.C. His father ran a small bicycle repair shop in the city. Not a bicycle store, a repair shop. The distinction matters. It was a working-class operation, built on labor and tools, not on retail margins. As a boy, Charles shadowed his father through that shop, learning the way a small business breathes. Slowly, carefully, with an eye always on what the customer needed before the customer knew they needed it. When he was old enough, he went to war. He served in the United States Army as a cryptographer, a job that required precision, pattern recognition, and the ability to hold large amounts of information in order, under pressure. He was not an academic. He had no university degree in business. What he had when he came home from the war in the mid-1940s was a cryptographer's eye for systems and a repairman's instinct for what was broken. In April 1948, Charles Lazarus was 24 years old. He had $2,000 in savings and a $2,000 loan. He looked at Washington, D.C., and saw something that other people were not yet seeing. The men who had gone to fight were coming home. They were marrying. They were having children. More children, faster than any generation in recent American history. The maternity wards were full. The baby carriages were everywhere. He converted his father's bicycle repair shop into a children's furniture store. The address was 2461 18th Street, NW, in the Adams-Morgan neighborhood. He called it Children's Supermart. The shelves held cribs, prams, high chairs, changing tables, everything a young family setting up a home would need. He priced it to move. He kept it simple. But customers kept asking him one question. Once the crib was assembled and the nursery was done, the parents would come back, and they would say, "Do you have any toys?" Lazarus noticed something that changed everything. Furniture you buy once, a crib lasts years, but toys break. Toys go out of fashion. Toys get lost. The same child who received a toy train for Christmas would need a new one or a different one 6 months later. The repeat purchase rate on toys was extraordinary compared to furniture. The business case was immediate. He began stocking toys, then more toys, then more. He watched what sold, what didn't, what parents asked for when they couldn't find it. He was not managing a shop. He was conducting a study. Every transaction was a data point. Every request that he couldn't fill was a gap he planned to close. By 1957, he was ready. He opened his first store dedicated exclusively to toys, not furniture, not clothing, just toys, in Rockville, Maryland. He modeled it on the supermarket format that Americans were then beginning to take for granted. Wide aisles, high shelving, items stocked in depth rather than in variety, self-service carts. The name, Toys R Us, came partly from necessity. The full name he wanted, Baby Furniture and Toy Supermarket, would not fit on the sign, so he shortened it, and he made the R go backwards because he wanted children to feel, when they saw that sign, that it was written by someone just like them. The backwards R was not a marketing gimmick designed by a consultant. It was the instinct of a man who understood that his customers were not yet old enough to read. The first Toys R Us in Rockville was not what we would recognize today. But its essential architecture was already there. The deep inventory, the wide format, the logic that if a child could name a toy, Lazarus wanted it to be on his shelf. The toy industry in the late 1950s was still largely governed by the Christmas cycle. Manufacturers built their catalogs around the holiday season. Department stores stocked their shelves in November, and by January, the toy section was cleared away to make room for something else. Lazarus rejected this entirely. He stocked toys year-round, at consistent prices, in quantities that department stores could not match. Manufacturers who had never thought about whether a toy would sell in March or August suddenly had a retail partner willing to find out. By 1966, Lazarus had 4 stores in the Washington area, and the operation was outgrowing what he could finance alone. He sold the company to Interstate Stores, Incorporated, a holding company based in New York, in exchange for the capital to expand nationally. Lazarus did not leave. He stayed on to run the Toys R Us division. It was a deal that gave him resources without, he believed, surrendering control. For a time, it worked. The Toys R Us division grew, while the rest of Interstate's portfolio struggled. By 1974, the parent company was in serious difficulty, filing for bankruptcy, a genuine existential crisis for every business it owned. Here is where the character of Charles Lazarus becomes plain. Rather than step back and let the lawyers sort it out, he stepped forward. He took control of the restructuring process, worked with creditors, and managed the separation of the viable toy business. He had every reason to walk away. The bankruptcy was not his fault, and the legal exposure was real. He stayed. In 1978, 4 years after the bankruptcy filing, Charles Lazarus took the new independent Toys R Us public, on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker TOY. The stock offering was, by the standards of the day, a sensation. That model was the key. Lazarus had invented something new, the category killer. The store so large, so deep, so completely stocked in its chosen area that no competitor operating at a smaller scale could survive next to it. Home Depot would do it for hardware. Circuit City would attempt it for electronics. Best Buy would refine it. But Charles Lazarus, a man with a bicycle shop education and a cryptographer's discipline, was the one who invented the format. By 1983, there were more than 200 Toys R Us stores across the United States. Kids R Us, a clothing spin-off, opened the same year. The catalogue that Lazarus had once studied, what children wanted, what parents would buy, was now a national intelligence operation. Toy manufacturers would not commit to wide-scale production without first running it past the buyers at Toys R Us. The jingle, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid," launched in the early 1980s. Geoffrey the Giraffe became a figure that 3 generations of American children would recognize on sight. The machine was running, and for a decade and a half, it ran without serious interruption. The stocking philosophy was depth before breadth. If a manufacturer produced a toy in 6 color variants, Toys R Us wanted all 6 in quantity. The company's purchasing power, by the mid-1980s, was large enough that it could negotiate directly with manufacturers on production quantities, packaging design, and pricing. Relationships that no department store toy section, operating as a small corner of a larger business, could replicate. Mattel, Hasbro, Fisher-Price, Lego, all of them understood that their relationship with Toys R Us was not merely important. It was load-bearing. In the best years of the late 1980s and early 1990s, the company's net earnings regularly exceeded $400 million annually. Stockholders' equity rose to $3.1 billion by the end of fiscal year 1993. The company had more than 1,000 stores in the United States and had expanded internationally into Europe, Asia, and beyond, eventually reaching 35 countries and jurisdictions. In Japan, where the retail toy market was still largely the province of small toy shops and department stores, Toys R Us arrived in 1991, backed by a partnership with McDonald's Japan, and its arrival was so disruptive to local retailers that the Japanese government faced diplomatic pressure to restrict the chain's expansion. That is not an exaggeration. A toy store generated diplomatic tension between 2 governments. In 1996, the company launched Babies R Us, a specialty chain for infant and toddler products that quickly became the largest baby product specialty chain in the world. By the early 2000s, Babies R Us was operating more than 200 stores and generating substantial profits that helped offset the increasing pressures on the core toy retail business. In the year 2000, the company opened its Times Square flagship at 1514 Broadway. The store was 110,000 square feet across 3 floors. It had a 60-foot indoor Ferris wheel. It had a life-size replica of a Barbie dream house. It had a 2-story tall animatronic T-Rex from the Jurassic Park franchise. On the day it opened, the line stretched around the block. Critics called it a monument. Supporters called it the future. In retrospect, it was something closer to a last gasp, one of the most expensive retail experiments in American history, arriving precisely as the ground beneath brick-and-mortar retail was beginning to shift. The company's employees, some of them working their 2nd decade, some their 3rd, were the institutional memory of the operation. Store managers who had joined as part-time stock workers in their teens, toy buyers who had been recruited directly out of university, into a training program that took 18 months to complete. warehouse workers who had followed their parents through the same loading bays. In the smaller cities and suburban strip malls where most Toys R Us stores actually operated, the chain was not just a shop. It was a kind of civic institution, a place where generations of families had made memories, where children learned for the first time that a store could be specifically, entirely designed for them. Anne-Marie Reinhardt Smith, who would later become one of the most vocal advocates for laid-off workers, spent 30 years with the company. She described it simply: she devoted her entire adult life to Toys R Us. Chapter 4. The First Cracks. The year 1998 should have been a warning. In that year, for the first time in the company's history, Toys R Us was outsold in domestic toy retail by Walmart. The figures were specific. Walmart held 17.4% of the American toy market. Toys R Us held 16.8%, half a percentage point. But the direction of travel was clear, and the causes were structural. Walmart had spent the early 1990s largely avoiding the toy category, recognizing that the margins were thin. Then, in 1990, the Arkansas-based discounter made a deliberate decision: stock the hottest toys, sell them at or below cost as loss leaders, and use the foot traffic to drive sales across the rest of the store. Target followed. Costco began adding toys to its warehouse format. The category killers were being killed by a new category of killer: the everything store, which could subsidize toy sales with margins from groceries, clothing, and electronics. The fundamental competitive advantage that Lazarus had built, the depth of selection, the consistent pricing, the year-round availability, was being eroded not from below by smaller competitors, but from above by retailers with vastly larger balance sheets and the ability to absorb losses that Toys R Us could not match. The company's market share went from 25.4% in 1990 to 18.4% by 1997. In the same period, Walmart's share grew from 9.5% to 16.4%. Those numbers tell a clean, linear story of displacement. The company knew. The response in the mid-1990s was a restructuring plan that included closing underperforming stores, streamlining merchandise by up to 20%, and the development of a new store concept called Concept 2000. Redesigned interiors meant to provide a more appealing shopping environment, addressing the long-standing criticism that Toys R Us stores were fluorescent, warehouse-like, and hostile to the browsing experience. But what the company did not do, what it fatally failed to do, was invest aggressively in the one emerging channel that would reshape all of retail: the Internet. In August 2000, Toys R Us signed a 10-year strategic alliance with Amazon.com. The agreement was designed to solve a specific problem. The company's own website, toysrus.com, had been overwhelmed during the 1999 holiday season, unable to fulfill orders in time for Christmas. The company agreed to pay Amazon $50 million per year, plus a percentage of sales. In exchange, toysrus.com would be featured as Amazon's exclusive seller of toys and baby products. What almost nobody understood at the time was this: the agreement had been written in a way that allowed Amazon, at its own discretion, to let third-party sellers onto the platform, including direct competitors of Toys R Us. Within 2 years, Amazon had done exactly that. The toy category on Amazon's platform was filling up with other retailers selling the same products, often at lower prices. Toys R Us sued Amazon in 2004, alleging breach of contract. The lawsuit was successful. The court allowed the company to terminate the deal. But the money recovered could not compensate for the 5 years of digital development that had not happened while Amazon was handling the website. When Toys R Us finally tried to build its own e-commerce operation, it was years behind. The technical infrastructure was not there. The customer data, accumulated during millions of transactions on Amazon's platform, belonged to Amazon. And the habits of the customers themselves had already shifted toward the convenience that Amazon had engineered. This is the detail that never made the headlines cleanly enough. Toys R Us did not simply fail to build a website. It actively handed the keys of its online business to the company that would eventually destroy it, in exchange for a fee and a promise of exclusivity that Amazon chose not to honor. Charles Lazarus stepped down as CEO in 1994. The management that followed was not bad. It was not malicious. But it was not Charles Lazarus. And it was navigating an increasingly difficult competitive environment with a balance sheet that was about to become catastrophically burdened. What happened next was not the result of bad strategy alone. It was the result of a specific decision made on a specific day by specific people who had a specific interest in the outcome. Chapter 5. The Deal That Killed It. On March 17, 2005, at its corporate headquarters in Wayne, New Jersey, Toys R Us Inc. announced it had accepted an offer to be acquired by an investment consortium consisting of Kohlberg Kravis Roberts and Company, Bain Capital Partners LLC, and Vornado Realty Trust. The transaction was valued at $6.6 billion. The buyout was a leveraged acquisition. That term requires a precise explanation. In a leveraged buyout, the purchasing investors contribute a portion of the purchase price in cash equity and borrow the remainder from financial institutions. The borrowed funds, the debt, are then placed onto the balance sheet of the company that has just been acquired. The company itself becomes responsible for repaying money it never borrowed for a purchase it did not choose. In this transaction, the three buyers contributed approximately $1.3 billion of their own equity, roughly 20% of the total price. The remaining $5.3 billion was borrowed. The debt was transferred to Toys R Us. From 2005 onward, Toys R Us paid an average of $400 million per year in interest on its debt. Money that did not go to stores, to staff, to technology, or to price competition. The company's cash reserves, which stood at $2.2 billion before the acquisition, had fallen to $301 million by 2017. Analysts at Moody's, reviewing the situation years later, would state plainly that the high leverage from the 2005 leveraged buyout had reduced the company's financial flexibility, which in turn limited investment, which led to the erosion of its competitive position at a time when its primary competitors, Walmart, Amazon, and Target, were running on all cylinders. Between 2010 and 2013, the three private equity firms attempted to take Toys R Us public again, which would have allowed them to recoup their investment through a stock market listing. The IPO process was initiated and then shelved 3 times. The company was never able to reach the financial targets that would justify a public offering at a price the owners found acceptable. If you are watching this documentary and finding it as compelling as we do, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thousands of stories like this one go untold every year. Your subscription helps ensure that does not continue to happen. So the owners held on. And while they held on, the company continued paying $400 million a year to service the debt they had placed on it. And the stores continued to age, and Amazon continued to grow, and Walmart continued to invest. And Toys R Us, the company that had once terrified government trade negotiators in Tokyo, fell further behind every single year. Chapter 6. The Destruction in Detail. By 2015, the numbers were becoming impossible to ignore. Revenue had fallen from its 2011 peak of $13.9 billion to $11.5 billion. Market share in the United States had been declining steadily. The stores themselves, most of them built in the 1980s and 1990s, never significantly renovated, had acquired the specific quality of retail that had stopped trying. The lighting was harsh. The shelving was the same it had always been. Staff-to-floor ratios had been cut to the point where a customer looking for help was often looking for a long time. A T. Kearney consultant, Greg Portell, described the situation directly. If you're going to have that breadth of inventory, you need someone in the store to help you find it, help you experience it. What the company actually needed at this point was approximately $1 billion. It had approximately $100 million available in a good year after debt service. The gap was not a management problem. It was a structural impossibility. CEO Dave Brandon understood the problem. He filed documents indicating a bankruptcy reorganization could allow the company to invest in stores, add playrooms, and create birthday party spaces to make the stores a destination. Both plans were reasonable. Both plans arrived years too late to matter. The event that collapsed the timeline was the response of the company's suppliers in September 2017. When word circulated through financial press reports that Toys R Us was exploring a potential bankruptcy filing, the company's trade vendors began demanding changes to their payment terms. Where previously they had operated on standard 60-day accounts, they began asking for cash on delivery. Given that the company generates approximately 40% of its annual revenue in the weeks before Christmas, the supplier crackdown could not have come at a worse possible moment. The sudden demands for COD payments created an immediate, sudden need for more than $1 billion in liquidity. The company simply did not have it. On September 18, 2017, Toys R Us, Inc. filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. It was retail's third largest bankruptcy in American history. Brandon, on the day of the filing, issued a statement calling it the dawn of a new era. He promised no stores would close and vowed the company would emerge as a viable competitor. The holiday season that followed was catastrophic. Sales fell sharply as customers, uncertain about the chain's future, chose to take their business elsewhere. By early 2018, the company's major creditors, the firms holding the secured debt from the 2005 buyout, had concluded that liquidation would return more value to them than any conceivable restructuring plan. On March 14, 2018, Toys R Us announced that it would close or sell all 735 of its remaining American stores, including all Babies R Us locations. No viable buyer emerged. Liquidation sales began later that month. For 3 months, the stores operated as slow-motion disappearances. Shelves thinning week by week, the back walls of product pallets visible through the gaps, prices marked down in stages. Anne-Marie Reinhardt-Smith, who had spent 30 years with the company, stood on the steps of a courthouse and said, "I come from the generation where you got rewarded for hard work. I devoted my entire adult life to Toys R Us." She was not alone. 33,000 workers were losing their jobs. Under the company's long-standing policy, a departing employee was entitled to 1 week of severance pay for every year of service. A worker with 30 years at the company would be owed 30 weeks. They received nothing. Chapter 7. The End. June 29th, 2018. The final Toys R Us stores in the United States closed their doors on a Friday. There was no ceremony, no press conference in the parking lot, no formal acknowledgement from the private equity firms. The stores simply ran out of inventory to sell, and then they ran out of time, and then they locked the doors. Patty Van Fossen, 54, a long-time employee from Ohio, was among the workers who gathered at protests in New York City. She told reporters, "I'm never going to have a job like Toys R Us. It was the best job I had. I was surrounded by children." In the final weeks, staff in stores across the country had been photographing what remained: the empty shelves, the bare floors, the stripped fixtures. One image became widely shared. An employee who had staged a farewell image of Jeffrey the giraffe, the company's mascot for more than 5 decades, walking out of an emptied store with a small suitcase. The image went viral. It required no caption. The 16-foot fiberglass statue of Jeffrey that had stood in the lobby of the company's corporate headquarters, a statue weighing 550 pounds, was removed during the liquidation process. No buyer could be found. It was eventually arranged for it to be donated to a children's hospital in New Brunswick. The giraffe went from a corporate lobby to a children's ward. Mattel and Hasbro reported significant revenue shortfalls in the months that followed. They had not merely lost a customer. They had lost a distribution channel that had shaped the industry for 4 decades. A settlement was eventually reached in 2019. Full-time employees received $60. Part-time employees received $34. The original claims had been for more than $75 million. Charles Lazarus did not live to see the doors close. He died on March 22, 2018, at the age of 94, at his home in New York City, 1 week after the announcement that all American stores would be liquidated. The company he had built with $4,000 and a converted bicycle shop outlasted him by 98 days. You asked at the beginning of this story 2 questions. The first was, how does the world's largest toy retailer end up fighting for its own survival? The answer is this: a business that was generating substantial operating profit. The company's own analysts later confirmed that without the debt service payments, Toys R Us would have reported a net profit in the years before its collapse, was deliberately loaded with $5.3 billion in borrowed money by 3 firms that intended to extract their returns and exit. The debt consumed the capital that should have funded digital transformation, store renovation, wage competitiveness, and price matching. The company was not beaten by Amazon or Walmart alone. It was beaten by mathematics, by an interest payment that absorbed roughly $400 million every single year for 12 years, leaving nothing for the investments that survival required. Amazon and Walmart finished what the debt had started. The second question was, what actually happened inside those walls? The answer to that one is quieter and sadder. Inside those walls, 33,000 people continued to come to work, some of them for 10 years, some for 30, believing, as employees in functioning institutions tend to believe, that the institution would continue to function. They helped children find toys, they stocked shelves, they managed inventory, they trained new hires. They did what the job required of them, in stores that were slowly being starved of the investment that would have kept them competitive, by owners who knew that the structure they had built could not survive. What remains today of the place where those stores stood? At 2461 18th Street NW in Washington, D.C., the address of Charles Lazarus's original children's supermart, there is now a bar called Madam's Organ Blues Bar. The corporate headquarters in Wayne, New Jersey, at 1 Jeffrey Way, has been repurposed into office space. The Times Square flagship at 1514 Broadway, the store with the indoor Ferris wheel, the Barbie dream house, the animatronic dinosaur, closed in 2015 and was converted into commercial office space. The Ferris wheel was removed. The space is now partially occupied by a Gap flagship and other tenants. The 110,000 square feet that once contained the largest toy store in the world is now available for corporate leasing. Something survived. In 2019, a new entity called True Kids Incorporated opened 2 smaller interactive stores, one in New Jersey and one in Houston. Both closed in 2020. Today, the Toys R Us brand exists in a diminished form through a partnership with Macy's department stores, which operate branded concessions in selected locations. The brand also continues under licensing arrangements in several international markets, including the United Kingdom, where a limited number of stores have reopened. Geoffrey the giraffe still appears in the marketing. He still smiles the same smile. The intellectual property that Charles Lazarus built over 7 decades, the name, the backwards R, the mascot, has survived. The company that housed it has not. Now for the question of responsibility. It would be convenient to place the entire weight of this collapse on KKR, Bain Capital, and Vornado. That case has genuine merit. They imposed a debt structure that any rigorous financial analysis showed could not sustain the company through the digital transition that was visibly approaching in 2005. They extracted $464 million in fees and interest while the company deteriorated. They structured their ownership in a way that insulated them from the workers' claims. These are facts, not interpretations. But the full account requires more than one villain. The Amazon partnership of 2000 was negotiated by the management of the pre-buyout company. The failure to build an independent digital infrastructure was a management failure. In 2005, the United States financial system was willing to lend enormous sums to private equity firms to purchase businesses. These are not accidents of the particular case. They are features of a system. The co-founders of just one of the 3 firms involved, KKR's Henry Kravis and George Roberts, each made $100 million in the year the company's workers received $60. That is the story of Toys R Us. Not a story of inevitable decline, not a story of a company defeated by progress, but a story of a functional business with genuine competitive problems that were solvable, that had, in fact, begun to be solved, until a specific set of financial actors made a specific set of decisions that made the problems permanently unsolvable. They had every chance to survive. Someone chose not to let them. And now we want to hear from you. From what country are you watching this? Do you remember those stores? Did you work there? Or did someone in your family? And what part of this story hit you hardest? The moment you learned about the debt, about the Amazon deal, about the $60 settlement. Tell us in the comments. Every story like this one lives or dies on the people who remember it.